Hey, Daily Dosers. My name's Austin Payne. I'm one of the high school pastors on the Vista campus, and today we're picking up in 1 Peter chapter 5. But do you remember New Year's resolutions? It feels weird to talk about New Year's resolutions in September, but 9 months ago, we turned the page on 2020 into 2021, and in some ways, 2021 feels like the longest year ever, and in other ways, I'm like, how are we in September? How do we have only a couple months left before it's 2022? And as I read this passage today, there's a handful of things in here that always seem to be New Year's resolutions for me. And I always seem to go one of two directions. Either I'm trying really hard and I'm very willful. I'm pull myself up by my bootstraps and kind of white knuckling it of going, I can do this. I can put elements of discipline into my life. Or I kind of oscillate and swing the other way and I kind of give up. And where I once was willful, I'm kind of will-less now. I'm like, I don't have the will to keep doing that. And it's all the way in September. Maybe it lasted 6 weeks or 8 weeks or a couple of months. But here in 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter says this. He says, in the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humility feels like one of those things that I will be chasing for the rest of my life. Right? The day I receive an award for humility and stand up proud to receive it is probably the day that I failed at humility. And humility always feels like one of those things where in Scripture, how many times does it say God opposes the proud and gives favor to the humble? Why does pride seem to seep its way back into my life? And there's plenty of areas where I'm very willful or I'm will-less, and it feels like this kind of just pendulum swing between those two things. And then he says this in chapter 5, verse 8, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be alert and sober-minded. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. Right? Express humility, demonstrate humility towards one another. There's this directional humility. Cast all your anxiety upon God and then resist the devil because he's this roaring lion just waiting to devour people. And these feel like things that I want action steps for. Show me how to be more humble in my life. Right? How can I consistently cast my anxiety? Because the last 2 years has been filled with anxiety for me as a new child came into our life, as there were so many unknowns here at work, and there's these moments with family and travel and the news cycle, and there seems to be so much that causes anxiety, and yet there's this invitation to cast my anxiety upon him. And I want those action steps, and I want to be willful, and then I fail. And it feels like New Year's resolutions where I'm really trying and I'm willful and then I'm will-less. And then lastly, to resist him, right? This action word that I love in my faith to go, how do I resist the devil? Give me a list of things I can do. And lately, my wife's just started a program at Biola University called the Institute of Spiritual Formation. And one of her professors challenged her that when we feel willful or will-less, really the attitude and posture that we should have in life is to be willing. To go, God, as I seek to be humble and lean on you by casting my anxiety upon you, it's simply reliant dependence on you that's going to be my resisting of the devil. I want to be this strong warrior believer that goes, I'm going to stand up to the roaring lion and I'm going to stare him down and I'm going to say, I'm going to resist you. And I miss the verses before that say, be humble. Right? Have an appropriate view of yourself. Don't think less of yourself, just think about yourself less. And while you're being humble, take your anxiety and cast it upon somebody else. Be fully dependent on him. And that's how you'll resist the devil. It's not a willfulness of me, pulling myself up my bootstraps and figuring out the action steps. And it's not just giving up. It's not going, oh, well, I can't do anything. It's a daily reliance to John 15, abide in him, remain in him, and have this reliant dependent on the God that says, come to me, have an appropriate view of yourself, cast your anxiety upon me, and that's how you'll stand up. And know that there's believers all around the world doing this exact same thing. To God be the honor and glory, as Peter ends here his letter and says, if you want to stand against the devil, it's got to be in a reliant way, humbly casting our anxiety upon him. Thanks, Dosers. See you tomorrow.